Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Four Quarter Talk podcast with myself, Jack Brazil, and my co-host, Josh Mazoke. As always, say what's up, bro.
What's up, man? A lot to get into. It's big news today.
I think you all know what we're going to talk about today. One of the biggest trades in recent memory. James Harden is now the newest recruit of the Brooklyn Nets, obviously through trade. The trade that shook the NBA last night, and we're actually very glad because yesterday we were going to record the episode before the trade, but we held off, and thank God we did because, there's not much else to talk about right now around the league. Josh, what was your initial reaction when you saw that this deal went through?
So I was like most people on my notification because obviously all year round I've got Shams and Woj.
I got them as well.
I was refreshing for like half an hour because there was a load of different developments. There was like, they're starting to narrow it down to the Nets and the Sixers, and there was just a lot going on. And then ironically, I got the news from you because I went off after a while. First thing I thought was, because obviously they just said that they went through, and I'm thinking like, what did they get? And as soon as everything started to get finalized, the first thing I looked at was 8 picks.
8 goddamn picks.
You'd think that the Nets would have like some sort of like PTSD from giving away.
Yeah, I mean, if any franchise knows about giving up their picks, it's the Brooklyn Nets. It seems to be part of their ethos almost. If you don't know what we're talking about, obviously that blockbuster trade back in 2011, I want to say. I could be wrong there, but it was early 2010s, which sent Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett, and who's the last player?
Paul Pierce, Kevin Garnett.
Who was the last? Was it Ray Allen?
Nah. No, I think they made they made a big three, but one of the players was already there.
Yeah. But anyway, so the Brooklyn Nets acquired.
It was centered around those two. Yeah, it was centered around those.
They acquired Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce for a bunch of picks, and that birthed the Brooklyn Nets of the mid 2010s, which were by far and away the worst team in the NBA for that time.
And those picks included players that being players like Jaylen Brown,
Jason Tatum,
Colin Sexton, quite a lot of
NBA stars, And
it's quite ironic though now that after they supposedly got fleeced by that deal, they were able to put themselves in a stronger position than the Brooklyn Nets than the Boston Celtics are in right now.
Yeah, it's funny how things work in the NBA. It really is. But let's dive deeper into the trade. Talk about all the different moving parts of that deal because there is a lot. It ended up being a 4-team trade, obviously with the center of that trade being the Rockets and the Nets, but the Pacers and the Cavs got involved too. So I'll just break this down for you as quickly as I can. Obviously, the Brooklyn Nets acquired James Harden for the Houston Rockets, where the Rockets get Victor Oladipo from the Indiana Pacers. The Nets send the Rockets Dante Exum, Rodion Kurucs, 3 first-round picks, all unprotected, and 4 first-round pick swaps. So 7 first-round picks in total, all for James Harden. Then the Pacers, and the Nets also acquire. The Rockets also acquire Caris LeVert from the Nets, but Caris LeVert was dealt to the Pacers for Victor Oladipo and a second-round pick. And then the Cavs get Jarrett Allen and Taurean Prince for a first-round Milwaukee pick for next year. So quite a lot of moving parts there. Shaking up the league is a bit of an understatement. We're seeing the re-emergence of the NBA Superteam. Tell me parts about this, Josh, that you love. Tell me parts about this that you hate, because there's a lot going on here.
Yeah, all right. So we can start. We'll start with those 2 main teams involved, obviously, being the Rockets and the Nets. Going at it from the Nets' point of view first, I think we can both go through that.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've got the 3rd star they want, And you have to think that the last couple of weeks, the situation going on with Kyrie Irving probably pushed them towards this, because the way they were rolling at the start of the season, I was thinking there's no point of even going for James Harden, because they have that depth and they have enough offense. If anything, the thing they needed the most was defense, which this trade probably makes worse. Not with Harden, because Harden's not a bad defender, but they've surrendered a lot of rim protection. In Jarrett Allen, and their depth, especially with Spencer Dinwiddie out, is quite shaky right now. But obviously, adding another, top 5 to 10 player next to KD, you can't really go wrong with that. And hopefully, if they are able to get Kyrie back, I mean, that's going to be
scary.
That's some all-time offensive firepower right there.
But as you mentioned, with the defense, they are losing a lot of defense in this trade, and they're obviously going to be replacing Jarrett Allen with someone they already had on the roster, DeAndre Jordan, who started the season as the starting center. But over the past few games, Jarrett Allen had been getting those starting minutes and had looked amazing. He shut down Nikola Jokic in that game. He's providing some much needed rim protection that DeAndre Jordan wasn't, providing. And this isn't the DeAndre Jordan of the Lob City Clippers days. This is a very different DeAndre Jordan, one that's not as athletic, not as fast, probably doesn't have as good as an IQ. So that's a big and overlooked part of the deal, I think.
His best attribute right now going for him is that he's really good friends with KD and Kyrie. Because that has to be the only reason why they'd focus on him rather than Jarrett Allen, because it's quite confusing. There's not really any
Well, I guess that they feel like that's a sacrifice they had to make to get James Harden. Because I think if you replace DeAndre Jordan in that deal, there's no way it goes through. Because
of course, I just mean from the start of the season how they were pushing for him to be the start.
But Jarrett Allen had looked really good for the Nets. So it'll be interesting to see how he gets on in Cleveland. I'm sure Cleveland have now found a center that matches the timeline of Sexton and Garland. So they've got kind of a little big three going on there for the future.
We'll go over that.
But so that's a big positive for them.
For sure. But it's obviously on paper that just sounds crazy, having those three offensive
juggernauts,
absolute juggernauts. But I find it hard. It kind of seemed like a trade that didn't need to happen. Like, I don't think the Nets needed to make this deal. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty around Kyrie, but in the grand scheme of just the season and what they gave up depth, they gave up their future again. And as just insane as KD has looked coming back, I mean, he had like a 30-point triple-double just the other night, followed it up with 26 easy points in around 20-30 minutes. But his injury is still a concern. He's still human, it's really early. We're about 4 weeks in now, and there's still room for setbacks. There's still room for all of that, and he's up there in age as well. You've got Harden coming in, who's also fairly up there in age. He's shown a little bit of regression at the start of the season, but obviously part of that is him not being interested in the situation and just came in terrible shape. And then obviously Kyrie's like, you don't know what's going on with that right now.
Off the rails a bit.
It's a bit, I don't know if it's a risk they needed to make. Maybe they felt that they needed to do this in order to really take advantage of this window that they have. And obviously, with the uncertainty of Kyrie and just how player contracts are never really that full length anymore. Once you get to those last 2 years, that last 1-2 years, you're kind of thrusted into a free agency type situation already, as we're seeing with a lot of players looking to force trades. So they want to keep KD happy. So you can't ignore that, because there have been rumors about KD, Kyrie, and Harden coming together to hatch this idea back in the summer in a different workout. So you have to make him happy. But I don't know. I don't feel like this was an essential move.
Yeah.
They had enough offense. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it pans out.
Well, one of the things I'm interested to see is that I've heard a lot of noise about people saying, they don't think there'll be a fit problem between Durant and James Harden, seeing as they played together before in Oklahoma. But I'm not too sure about that. I think when James Harden was in Oklahoma, he played a very different role to the player he's become.
Yeah.
Being that sixth man, and now he's one of the most ball dominant players in the NBA. So I think they'll have to work that out, and especially if Kyrie comes back, there's only one basketball. You got to remember that. They're gonna have to work out that balance, that fit between the three of them. So there could be some teething problems there, and that's even if Kyrie comes back at all. Kyrie has been kind of AWOL for the past week. After, as you said, the very promising start that the Nets made. And I do think that has pushed the hand of the Brooklyn Nets to go and pursue this deal. I think maybe internally, this situation is probably more severe than it seems. I think I was hearing whispers that Kyrie he's dictated to them that he may not come back for the whole season, for the whole year. So maybe that's the reason why the Nets have gone and pursued this deal. Also, interest from the 76ers maybe has, rushed them into throwing all those picks, because they didn't want to miss out on that target. I'm not sure how genuine the Sixers' interest actually was. Maybe it was just a ploy to get extra picks out of the Nets, media tactics. But I think a deal to the Sixers would have made a lot more sense for the Rockets, at least. So let's just go back over what the Rockets got for James Harden, essentially. So they got those 8 picks, and they've indirectly received Victor Oladipo, who's on a expiring contract. In my eyes, a deal for Ben Simmons and, maybe Tyrese Maxey or someone of that caliber and a few picks, that would have made a lot more sense to me, at least. Because you've got a young star in Ben Simmons who's only 23, 24. Tyrese Maxey's a rookie who's coming and look very promising. And you still get a bit of draft capital as well. But maybe that deal was never even on the table and it was just media speculation. But I do think, James Harden's comments the other day, who said, he's not sure that the situation can be fixed after that loss to the Lakers. And then Boogie coming out and saying stuff hasn't been right for a long time, and John Wall saying you can't give in after 9 games. I think that relationship there was just broken, and all parties had to move on, and that's exactly what they've done. But I didn't expect it to happen this quickly.
Yeah, I hear that. To be honest, I think all of the parties involved that were, negotiating about trying to acquire Harden, I don't think any of them were really under any pressure to make this deal happen until Kyrie departed from the team, because up until that point, the Nets were rolling. They had their depth, everything was working out for them. Even, whilst KD was in protocol, Karis LeVert stepped up, which that probably upped his trade value. And then the Sixers, they've started the season like tremendously, first seed in the East and all of that. So I'm thinking it was probably very hard for the Rockets to get. They had to plunge as soon as they saw all of this, especially the draft picks and all. They had to plunge on that because obviously the Oklahoma City Thunder own a lot of their draft capital for the next decade. So any chance to get draft picks and to have like an artificial type of rebuild was probably very appealing to them. So there were a few. I remember there was news earlier in the season about when they were negotiating with the Heat, and the sticking point there was that the Heat weren't willing to offer Duncan Robinson, which was interesting. So that kind of showed the type of trade value that was there with Harden, despite his ability, but just how dicey the situation was.
Yeah.
So
well, that's definitely going to harm his trade value. If teams know Harden wants out, they're going to offer less for him. So I guess the Rockets just saw a deal that they, I think this will take them in a direction of a rebuild, even maybe not a traditional rebuild, but a sort of rebuild. And the Nets, not the Nets, the Rockets probably saw the deal that secured their future as much as best as it could and took it. But also maybe the Sixers didn't pursue that deal because of how well they're doing. That could have
Exactly.
thrown off their team chemistry, inserting James Harden into the lineup. So the Sixers really had no need to do that trade, but the Rockets had to find a buyer, and I guess it was ultimately the Nets. What do you think about the Rockets picking up an expiring contract in Victor Oladipo instead of keeping Karis LeVert?
Yeah, that's fairly risky in my opinion. Especially I've seen reports that Oladipo is still eyeing up Miami Heat, signing with the Miami Heat in free agency, and I'm seeing that they could potentially look to trade him to flip him again for more assets going into that rebuild. Both flipping Oladipo and John Wall.
Yeah.
So obviously the Rockets have flipped that switch, and I don't think they're looking to, be that middle of the pack team anymore. I think they're just trying to sink straight to the bottom, get draft capital. But I don't know. I like the trade a lot better when they acquired Karis LeVert.
Yeah, that was. I'm not sure why they didn't keep Karis. I think he fits more the timeline of a rebuild. He's on a longer contract. But I really like that deal for the Pacers. I feel like Karis LeVert now can go on and be an all-star type player for the Pacers. So, it's one of those situations like Jeremy Grant and Julius Randle where you go to a small market team and kind of blossom. I think that will definitely happen with Karis LeVert. But Victor Oladipo, I don't see him sticking around in Houston for too long. I don't see him resigning there at all. And, I think as soon as Oladipo's gone, John Wall is gone, and I see the Rockets trying to rebuild their franchise around Chris Wood. Chris Wood becoming a franchise player would be, a quick turn of events from the G League battling player he was 2 years ago to a franchise player. But that's the direction I see the Rockets going in, and they've got 7 years worth of draft picks from the Nets. So they'll be hoping that this big three kind of crashes and burns as soon as possible. But even if it doesn't, in that 6th, 7th pick that they have in 6 years' time, 7 years' time, by that time the Nets might be back to that team that was bottom of the league, because KD and Harden will be maybe retired, late 30s. So for them that's positive. But a few of these picks, a few of the first couple of years of picks won't probably mean too much to them. But as you said, Oklahoma has most of their draft capital, so to get some of that back is vital for them.
I don't think it makes a lot of. The more I think about it, though, the more I don't see much sense in it, though, because
in what, sir?
The Rockets aren't going to be able to have a traditional rebuild. So there's not really a point of trading away your franchise player for an expiring contract. It does not make much sense at all.
No, it doesn't.
If you pair him up with Christian Wood, you can be respectable because right now it doesn't really matter if you're at the bottom of the league or the top of the league. Those picks remain the same for the other teams anyway. So there's much incentive to tank.
That makes sense.
There's zero incentive to tank. So because we even starting from this year, we have their pick swap. So they might as well have kept, because Christian Wood, as young as he is, or as much as he is, coming to the scene now, he's not like he's not incredibly young. I think he's around 26.
He's 25, I think.
Oh, 25. LeVert is in that age range, so at least they could have had like a Brooklyn Nets type rebuild that they had when they started to get players like LeVert back then, and D'Angelo Russell. So it won't be, 19-year-olds, but at least mid-20s to be respectful for a couple of years, because they're not going to be able to move that John Wall contract right now.
Yeah.
So they might as well be respectable for the moment, because having a lottery pick doesn't do anything for them right now.
Yeah, just go straight to Oklahoma. And that was the part of the deal where I thought the Rockets lost quite a lot of the value of the trade, is when they obviously traded LeVert for Oladipo. I still can't really wrap my head around that. But
look, picks are great, yeah, but picks do a lot more for, let's say, OKC than they do for the Rockets, because we've already got a few young players, like a nice little young core right now.
yeah,
The Rockets will be starting from like ground zero, so they're not going to have as smooth of a transition as we had. So it doesn't make much sense. I mean, if you look at the precedent of the last couple of years of players of Harden or even lower than his caliber, what teams were able to get for players like Paul George, Anthony Davis, even Drew Holiday this summer commanded about six draft picks, and Eric Bledsoe, so almost similar, like comparable return to James Harden, who is on a 2-year contract. He's not on an expiring deal. So as much as, Harden can complain as much as he wants about his situation, but he's still on a 2-year deal. So the leverage is still there as much as he can complain. So it's a bit, because the Lakers, the Pelicans were able to get a lot more on with AD with 1 year left.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I think they kind of rushed into this one.
Yeah, but I see what you're saying. But if James Harden just is, was planning to sit out the rest of the season, I'm not sure if he was, but his comments didn't sound too positive. That I think ultimately that forced the hand for the deal. That was the block that
But like I said though, with Anthony Davis,
got the ball rolling. I think that those comments.
Like I said with Anthony Davis though, he sat out most of the season as well.
Yeah,
and his situation was almost just as public as well.
Yeah.
You had several teams talking about the Celtics, several teams in those talks. You had him literally not playing games. I mean, Harden was still playing. So the Anthony Davis situation was even more alarming, and he wasn't traded until the offseason. So,
well, let's talk about more about what this means to the Nets. Obviously, they've given up some defense with this trade, but they've also given up some bench depth with this trade. Their bench looks particularly light right now, so they're obviously betting on star power over depth to get them to where they want to be, and they got names on the bench like Timothy Luwawu, Carabo, Landry Shamet, Bruce Brown Jr. Names like that.
They're not scrubs.
They're not scrubs, but they're players who haven't really shown any consistency in this league as of yet. Do you think a first-year coach like Steve Nash can get the best out of those role players?
I mean, like I said, offensively, I think when you have Mike D'Antoni on that coaching staff, that's promising at least.
Yeah.
And they do have because of obviously all the players that were involved in this deal, they do now have 3 open roster spots, I think.
Yeah.
And it is only about 7.5 million, so it will probably be veterans like Jamal Crawford, Iman Shumpert. But still, you've got enough money there to make it decent. It'll be more so the type of depth that the Warriors had in those later years of Kevin Durant, when they would just pick up role players here and there, older veterans.
Yeah.
But the problem with it is you're not gonna see the full product right away, because you've still got Kyrie out.
Yeah.
And you've still got, although James Harden may play this week, but he's still not in the greatest shape, and they've now got to completely reinvent their whole their whole system 4 weeks in, right after just starting to get chemistry. So
Yeah.
It's gonna be there's gonna be definitely growing pains there.
And they've still got Spencer Dinwiddie out for the season with injury.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
They're not going to be full strength on at least next season. But saying all this, where do you expect the Nets to get to? What's their goal now? Because for me, their minimum is the NBA Finals.
No, I see that. Yeah, definitely. They're definitely the team to. I don't even know if I'd say they're the team to beat because I don't know
what in the East.
Yeah, because I don't know what's happening with those
Kyrie.
other parts. There's a lot of uncertainty there. And the Sixers are rolling. There's a lot about the thing about a lot of these teams that they're going to go up against is that the weaknesses this team has, like they fit directly to the strengths of the other teams because Joel Embiid will absolutely abuse this team on the defensive end. Like, the Lakers, who are the team to beat, they've got that size to take advantage of this if they make the finals as well. Yeah. So they've got a lot to sort out. They definitely need to get. I can't really stress enough how the loss of Jarrett Allen is probably quite big because they were already struggling.
Sure.
They were already struggling.
He came in and completely transformed, the defensive side of that team this season. And he's due to get paid, and I think he's going to get a lot of money because Jarrett Allen is a very useful player in this league. I mean, few can block shots like he can. So that's going to be a massive loss that I think people underestimating.
They were already dangerous offensively, so you can't really get that much more dangerous. They didn't have to make this deal, in my opinion.
They didn't have to, but do you think James Harden is the caliber of player that warrants, when you get an opportunity like this, you don't pass it up?
Oh yeah, if it's offered, then you have to, and then especially with the dynamic of KD as well wanting this deal to go through for quite a while now.
Yeah, keep him happy. That's important as well.
Kyrie was apparently involved in that as well, so maybe this deal going through motivates Kyrie to come back. But obviously, Kyrie's situation is, beyond basketball, so we don't know about that.
Well, there's also reports coming from Kyrie's camp that he has problems with Steve Nash. Steve Nash.
That was a very shaky source. So I'll wait.
Yeah, but those are whispers, obviously. But if that
I did see him endorse Steve Nash quite a few times as well, so I don't know about that yet.
But there's also been problems in the past with Kyrie, reportedly not talking to teammates for weeks on end in practice. In Boston there was shaky reports of players and management. So he's obviously woke. Kyrie is potentially not the easiest person to get along with. So I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks for this team will be chemistry. And whether they can find that or not, who knows? I'm guessing they'll be hoping to just, sometimes when you put enough talented players together, they just work. So they'll be hoping that's the case with this trade. But let's quickly talk about the Pacers and the Cavs, who obviously acquired Karis LeVert and Jarrett Allen, respectively. Do you like these deals for these teams? And if so, why?
Yeah. When the dust settled with all of these deals, I feel like the Pacers were probably the team that most definitively benefited from this deal.
I agree as well. For sure.
They've gotten rid of a disgruntled player who, it got quite ugly with Oladipo towards the end of last season. I think there were reports of Oladipo telling players on other teams, trade for me, things like that during the game. So, you get rid of a player that doesn't want to be there on an aspiring deal in exchange for a younger, healthier, uprising talent who can replicate his production and is on a 3-year deal.
Yeah.
Being able to get involved in this deal, that's just a win in in every category for them there. They got younger. They got, Brogdon has emerged as, a go-to player for them so far. So pairing him up with, Levert there. Levert's used to fitting in alongside other players, playing back when he was with D'Angelo Russell, and now, during the season with KD and Kyrie, whilst being able to put up big numbers. So they've definitely raised their ceiling as well.
Yeah, and speaking of the Cavs as well, as I mentioned earlier, they've got that center that fits with the timeline, and they've obviously got Andre Drummond on the roster. He's been good for them this season, but he's a player on an expiring contract. He's making a lot of money, and at the age he's at, probably isn't in the long-term plans for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So they're not going to have to worry about getting a Drummond replacement when he probably doesn't re-sign with the Cavs this offseason. They've got that now in Jarrett Allen. What'd you say?
I think he'll give them better value than Drummond as well.
Yeah.
On a much cheaper deal as well.
Yeah, much cheaper deal.
Even if he's on, because he might demand the max he's able to get, but I think it would be worth it for them on that timeline as well, fitting with Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. But also the Taurean Prince acquisition is underrated as well. He's a very good wing. He's fairly young as well, so he'll fit with that. He'll definitely add to their rotation as well.
Yeah, so the Cavs, everyone was expecting them to be consistently one of the worst teams in the league after LeBron left them, but they've really they've executed this rebuild kind of flawlessly so far, getting assets for their present to help them in the regular season, and then now they're bringing in assets for their future as well, kind of without having to use the draft in many ways. Even though obviously they drafted Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, but picking up Jarrett Allen and Taurean Prince are only going to help with this rebuild. I see them becoming a low playoff team. They still got Kevin Love on the roster. There's still going to be question marks over whether he's healthy enough to play, what they do with his contract, all this. But at the very least, he could be a mentor for these young guys. He's someone that's been with the franchise for years. He knows the place like the back of his hand. So he's going to help those young guys bed in and then eventually be moved on, I would imagine. But yeah, I really like this deal for those two extra teams that were involved, the Pacers and the Cavs. If you're a Pacers and a Cavs fan, you probably woke up like, how the hell is our name thrown into this trade? But then you look at the deal and you think, oh, okay, we actually got a lot of good value for what we gave up. And I think if we're having to rank who got the best value from this trade, I think it'd have to probably be, on paper you'd have to kind of say the Nets, because they've got a perennial MVP candidate. He's in that conversation of top 3 every year. But then the Pacers and Cavs for me aren't far behind, because they gave up little and they got a lot. So and then the Rockets, obviously, a lot of what value they get out of this trade is dependent on the future. But on paper, they're out of the teams they're probably got the least.
Yeah, it's hard for you to fully rank or say winners and losers at this point, because I don't think the Rockets are done, and obviously the Nets, if they win one championship out of this, it's all worth it. No one cares.
Yeah.
They're in a similar situation to the Clippers in that sense. But yeah,
let's talk about worst case scenarios for the Nets. Do you think at all that this could be a big 3 disaster 2.0? That the players just don't get on. There's not enough, there's not enough basketball for each player. They don't shoot the ball well. All this, all that. They underperform, get to the second round of the playoffs. Do you think that's a possibility?
With the not enough balls to go around thing. Pause.
You finally had your moment.
Oh no, I said pause straight away, and
Nah.
you also said that same sentence like 3 times this episode.
I
That
said
was just
not
my.
enough. I said not enough ball. You said balls. It's different.
I mean, well, you can run it back. Don't worry about it. But I mean, that's how the saying actually goes. But anyway, never mind. I don't really subscribe to that theory, because a lot of the times when we've said this about several different teams coming together, we've said this about the Warriors when they acquired KD. Said it about Chris Paul and James Harden, which worked for quite a while.
Yeah.
I think these are talented players that can work things out.
Yeah.
I don't think that would be you. The biggest example I've actually seen of that being legitimate is probably the Celtics. Back when Kyrie came back from injury, that was and Gordon Hayward. But I think they can work that out, and I think part of Harden's reason for wanting to leave the Rockets is that he evaluated himself that that type of system wasn't working. I saw an interview way back. I might have referenced this on a previous episode, but I saw there was footage of Steph Curry talking to Mike Budenholzer at one of the All-Star games, I think, and they were talking about how Harden had a conversation with Curry where he was saying that he doesn't like, he wishes he played in a system like the Warriors where there wasn't as much, isolation ball, free-flowing movement, because before D'Antoni had arrived in Houston, whilst Harden's, obviously his usage went up from being a six-man, it was a lot more balanced offensively, where he'd have a lot more off-ball movement, he'd have a lot more mid-range shots. Like, it wasn't as predictable. And I think the last few years, as much as it's helped his regular season averages and giving him a lot of accolades and records and things, I think he's seen that it's not conducive to winning, and his tensions rose like directly after this week because they played the Lakers back to back, and one of the things that he said was that he doesn't believe there's anything the Rockets can do to get to the point where they can beat the Lakers in a 7-game series. So his eyes are on winning, and I think he's going there with the mindset of at least trying to adjust. We'll see how successful they can be with it, and obviously they're going to need the time. They're going to need Kyrie back, but I think he has at least the ambition to play closer to his first couple years in Houston.
Well, do you think he's gonna maybe have to revert back to some of those trends we saw as from six-man James Harden?
No, not even six-man James Harden. More so just 2012 to 15 Harden. Where it was a lot more balanced. Harden was getting he had mid-range shooting. He had ironically, Mike D'Antoni is on the Brooklyn coaching staff, so we'll see if he's learned from their shortcomings. But also you have to look at the fact that KD himself is a player that doesn't need too many touches himself. I mean, he's probably their best option, but as he showed in Golden State, he can be an off-ball player. He can play. He doesn't have to bring the ball up. He doesn't have to dominate the ball. So I think a lot of those things are overstated. And even Kyrie, he played with LeBron, who is far from an off-ball player himself. Kyrie was kind of like a two-guard almost. So we'll see how they'll be able to put it together. I just think it wasn't necessary, as I'll probably keep going back to, because their offense can be amazing. It went from top 5 to maybe 1, but sacrificing more defense. There hasn't been a championship team that wasn't top 5 in defense in quite a while. So that's good as well.
Well, like speaking of NBA champions of the past, I'm not sure if there's we've obviously had big threes in this league before. Like it's nothing new, but have we seen a big three that all three players want the ball in their hand as much as these three? With the Warriors, Klay Thompson doesn't need the ball in his hands that much. He just needs it for the shot. With the Miami big three, Chris Bosh wasn't there to have the ball in his hands. He was there to stretch the floor and grab rebounds. So I'm not sure if we've ever seen as many ball dominant players on one team in quite a while as this.
Yeah.
So that's where I think those questions are coming about the fit and the only one ball stereotype returning. But as you say, not Harden. Durant is a very intelligent basketball player, and his off-ball movement is an underrated aspect of his game. Kyrie's played with LeBron, who's possibly the most ball-dominant player in the league. It's just a question about whether James Harden can play with.
Yeah, he'll definitely struggle the most with it. As much as he wants to do it, it'll be difficult because he's now used to being top 2 in usage rate for the last half decade.
Yeah, and that's not going to be the case in Brooklyn. But I also think what the Nets need to convince Kyrie to come back as soon as possible, because that's going to help a lot with the fit going forward. Them getting in games together is only going to help them. And if that is the future of the franchise, which they obviously want it to be, that needs to happen. That gelling needs to happen as soon as possible, and that's not going to happen with Kyrie AWOL, is it? So he needs to come back as soon as possible for this deal to fully be a success for the Nets, I think. But even if Kyrie's future lies away from the Nets, and he doesn't want to play anymore for whatever reason, that needs to be sorted as soon as possible. So
absolutely,
the Nets can move on. They can figure out what game plan is their future. If it's with those three or it's with KD and Harden, they need to figure that out as soon as possible for this to be as successful as possible. And when we're talking about deals like this, as successful as possible means NBA championship.
They need that to justify what they gave up.
Yeah, like they've given up their whole future again. The first time they did that, it didn't result in a championship, not anywhere near that. So they'll be praying to God that it doesn't happen again.
It will be championship or bust for quite a while because
Do you think that pressure could get to the players? Championship or bust?
They've all three of them have played with that with those circumstances for quite a while now.
Didn't work out for James Harden, though, did it?
Yeah, I mean that 2018 year was there was a lot of. I mean Harden's not stepped up to the plate in a lot of different situations, but I don't. It's interesting. It's interesting, but I think KD's definitely he's up to that.
Well, I think we know. No, with this deal, I think we know out of the three, KD's going to KD. It's just I think the other two are the big question marks: Kyrie and James Harden. Kyrie is because of his off the court antics, and James Harden, we need to know what he can do on the court with these other two, if he can bring it in playoff time. A lot of questions that have been asked throughout his career. Can he answer them on the biggest stage now that he's on?
We know they didn't make this deal to make the Eastern Conference Finals because they're definitely capable of that before this.
Yeah, for sure. This is just them. LeBron must be tired of seeing all these super teams being formed against him.
I don't even see this as a super team, to be honest.
Really?
No.
Going up.
They don't have nearly enough depth.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I would see it as a super team.
Yeah, to be fair, most super teams don't have that.
Yeah, so, exactly.
I would say, this is a super team. But I don't see.
Be around the bush here. This is a super
2016 team. 2016 wasn't. I think.
No, 2016 wasn't a super team because
I don't like when people call that a super team.
Even the Warriors built that all themselves. So it's not something they kind of made.
I think you can still have a super team even if you draft every player if they're all high level players.
Yeah, but I guess what I mean by that, super team kind of has a connotation that is kind of a negative thing. That is kind of like you're buying your way to a shot at a ring. That's what I would associate the term super team with. I just think the 2016 Warriors were a very good team, but not a super team. No,
they were a great team almost, but I mean, if I don't really care how it comes together at the end of the day. You know, those Celtics teams back in the day that had several Hall of Famers, you know, several All Stars. You know, they're still super teams even if they draft their players. But I just it's interesting. Yeah, we'll see if it ends up being worth it. There's a lot of things, different things going into it, but obviously the desperation was there for both the Nets and the Rockets to make it happen. So
yeah,
that's
I'll tell you who I feel bad for in this trade. John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins, because you know they've come into Houston, and they've really come in, looked around the place, and said, okay, this is definitely a playoff team. This is definitely a place where we can have success. And you know, not even 10 games into the season, that's already been blown up in their face, and their future doesn't lie with that franchise. So you know, you got to feel hard done by for them. And you know, DeMarcus Cousins was clearly quite upset at James Harden's words and his actions, calling it very disrespectful, and saying he feels a certain type of way about some of the actions of James Harden. So you know, got to feel sorry for those guys a little bit.
at least they don't have to deal with it anymore because
Yeah,
I think coming into it, obviously the noise was starting to pick up, and DeMarcus Cousins said that coming into the situation, he was more excited about playing with John Wall because obviously their prior connection, and that, you know, they kind of already knew that this was kind of coming. Obviously they thought that, you know, Harden would be a bit more respectful, you know, a bit more professional about it because, you know, he didn't have, if you're going to end up playing, then you might as well, you know, play harder, you know, play like you want to be on the court. Because I saw possession in his last game where he almost just straight up threw the ball out of bounds. Like John Wall had to sprint to get it because he was just disinterested. He didn't care anymore.
Yeah.
So they you know, a lot of this is Harden just saying, you know, you're not good enough, which isn't great because that's not a great feeling for them. And you know, they were playing pretty well at the start. They had a lot of promising things going on about, you know, with Christian Wood stepping up. You know,
well, I thought they were going to be a lot better than they had showed. You know,
I think when you just
Christian
have
Wood
Harden, who is such a big part of the offense, and he just doesn't buy in at all,
Yeah.
you know, completely sabotage their season.
Wait, who knows? Maybe the Rockets will get a bounce off of this deal and actually have quite a good regular season.
So far, I mean, but yeah, if Victor Oladipo is all in, or whoever they end up getting for him, they can still be respectable, for sure.
See, that's tough. I'm not sure if he will be all in, Victor Oladipo, because he knows he's gonna have kind of the pick of a few teams in the summer.
But also he wants a good deal as well. He's on a contract year, so he needs to play hard too because there's a lot of question marks about him as well. Do the Heat even want him if they have to pay, you know, a certain amount to acquire him? So he's got to play hard as well. He's got to put his best foot forward. So you have a lot of hungry players on that team who are looking to, you know, rehabilitate their value in the league.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
I would like to actually see Victor Oladipo on the Heat. You know? I think having another scorer would take a lot of pressure off Jimmy Butler's shoulders. So that would be very interesting. But you know, this deal obviously shook up the league in more ways than one. And one way I wanted to talk to you about, Josh, do you think this is the re-emergence of the super team? You know, it'd been dead for a couple of years after you know KD left the Warriors, and we all thought maybe a bit naively that the league was going to go back to being organic and you know a bit more ethical, and players were going to stay with their teams. But do you think this deal has now blown that concept up?
Yeah. Firstly, I don't have too much of a problem with. I mean, super team. I mean, when we talk about super teams, you're talking about artificially brought together teams. You know that. But I don't have an issue with that. I think they're good for the league. It's good for the league having every team, you know, trying their hardest, you know, to push through. I don't think we're we're not gonna get players that just stick to one team for their whole career. Like we will, but it's gonna be rare. Because just the way the league's set up, back in the 90s, you know, and before that, when players used to stay with their team for the entire career, you know, it was because of the way the league was set up that they had no leverage. I mean, free agency wasn't even a thing back in, like, you know, Bill Russell's era, and even after that, a lot the power dynamics has just shifted. So and I don't have an issue with it. You know, it makes things very interesting. It puts pressure on franchises to actually, you know, put a good effort towards trying to win in order to keep their players, which, you know, that improves the product of the entire league. Because when the Golden State Warriors acquired KD, that pushed, you know, you had teams that gave up, but then you had teams like the Rockets who were like, okay, we're going for this, you know, which you have to respect. You know, they definitely pushed the Warriors, and they didn't. Everyone was like, oh, they're just gonna win the next, you know, 12 championships, but obviously that didn't happen. In that case, obviously the Warriors is an extreme circumstance, but I think it's just a cycle, really. I mean, going back to it, a lot of them are just reactions to other teams. You know, everyone's reacting to the Lakers' success. Before that, everyone was trying to put teams to go against, you know, the Warriors. Before that, the Heat. Before that, the Celtics. So it's just a lot of players. It's just a cycle. I'm not sure if it's going to push. I don't think this specific deal is going to push too much. Maybe you might see the Lakers try to acquire a player but I mean, they're always trying to acquire a player, you know, like Bill, to strengthen their team. So I don't think this is going to, you know, the Nets aren't about to, you know, take over the league for the next, you know, 5 years or so. So I'm not too worried about that.
All right. Well, I think that we've covered that deal as best as we could. You know, there's so much going on in that deal, but I think we've covered every corner of it. Definitely one that's going to change the league for a while. I'm fascinated to see how it works out. I can't wait to see James Harden in a Brooklyn Nets jersey. Shams just reported that he's taking back his famous number 13.
Stealing Shamit's number.
So, you know,
one thing I do know, for anyone that still plays 2K in 2021, which I don't know who that is, but yeah, the Nets are off limits.
Yeah, Nets are off limits. If you choose the Nets is the team you give to your little cousin or your little brother to try and even it up. But yeah, that's the deal that shook up the NBA. We just want to quickly mention about the coronavirus situation going around the league, just quickly. Obviously, we touched on it last time, but there's been loads of developments on it since. I feel like Shams and Warriors are tweeting about it 65 times a day. Games being postponed left, right, and center because of this new contact tracing rule that the league has put into fruition. You know, do you think this is jeopardizing the season? The continuation?
I just watched a video from Woj, who said that the reason why the NBA haven't, you know, pushed to, you know, put a stop to the season or suspension to the season for now is that they believe that they can get this under control because obviously on arrival at the bubble, there were a lot of cases going on. But they feel like that's just a reaction to not everyone completely understanding the protocols and people start to get used to them. They've started to tighten up these restrictions as well, with having a lot less, a lot less people that aren't directly connected to the team allowed, and you know, the use of masks on benches now. So they're tightening up the rules, and you know, there are players that aren't, you know, totally in favor of these rules. So you're having that going on, but they believe that they can get this, you know, they believe that they can finish this season and get it under control a bit. They have flirted with the idea of going on a, you know, week to 2 week break.
Yeah.
But right now they're pushing strong with it. I think everyone envisioned this happening at this point because, you know, it's not a bubble. You can't control all these grown men, as we said last week. So it's bound to happen. But yeah, we'll see, because there's a lot of games getting postponed right now.
Yeah.
So it's quite dicey.
And it's messing with my fantasy, Adam Silver. So behave yourself.
And them day-to-days, man, they're beating my ass right now.
Day-to-days all over the place. I've just seen on Twitter, the Rockets have just announced the trade, obviously. James Harden doesn't even get a farewell video. He just gets a little picture. So, Pete for James Harden, but I'm sure he won't really care. Anyway, thank you, everyone, for staying with us for this podcast. We had to hop on there and talk about that trade, obviously. You know, we're starting to pick up a bit of consistency, so let's keep this train going. Thank you, everyone, for supporting us, even if it's like the few little messages I'm getting on social media about people that have watched the podcast. It means a lot, trust me.
Yeah, we appreciate everyone that watched.
We'll keep on going from strength to strength this year, hopefully. Keep building the podcast. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We're gone. Peace.